The eternal palace of Valdrath stood as a monument to immortality's cruelty, a fortress carved from obsidian mountains where moonlight had reigned for 3,000 years without competition from the sun. Its spires pierced the perpetual night like accusations against heaven itself, while gargoyles weathered by centuries kept silent vigil over courtyards where no warmth had ever touched stone. Within the grand hall of lineages, where vampire lords had gathered for council since the age of first blood, an uncomfortable silence pressed against vaulted ceilings decorated with frescoes depicting their race's glory. Hundreds of immortals stood in their finest ceremonial attire, velvet darker than murder, silk that whispered secrets, jewelry forged from metals that predated human civilization. Their collective beauty was terrible and perfect, faces unmarred by time, bodies honed by centuries into weapons of seduction and death. Yet every single one of them refused to look toward the raised dais at the chamber's far end. There, upon a throne too large for its occupant, sat Princess Seraphine Valdrath, 17th daughter of the Crimson Emperor, heir to nothing, keeper of a bloodline that had turned its back on her the moment she drew her first breath. The princess was a study in contradictions, simultaneously fragile and regal, beautiful and broken, present yet somehow absent from the very gathering held in her honor. Her skin possessed that particular translucent quality of ancient porcelain, so pale it seemed to glow with internal moonlight. Silver-white hair cascaded down her shoulders and spilled over the throne's arms like frozen waterfalls, untouched by any ornament except for a single black ribbon woven through it, a mourning symbol she'd worn since childhood, though no one could remember whom she mourned. Her wings, those magnificent, terrible wings that marked her as true vampire nobility, spread partially behind the throne, each feather-like membrane detailed with patterns that resembled frost on glass. They were larger than most vampires' wings, spanning nearly 20 feet when fully extended, a sign of royal blood so pure it should have made her the pride of the empire. Instead, they trembled slightly, constantly, as if bearing a weight invisible to others. A blind fold of crimson silk covered the upper half of her face, tied with such care that not a single strand of her ethereal hair was caught beneath it. The fabric was thin enough that the faint glow of her eyes, that distinctive vampiric luminescence, bled through like dying embers behind gauze. But the eyes beneath would never see the nobles who refused to meet her gaze. They had been sightless since birth, a defect unheard of in vampire lineage, a flaw that marked her as cursed. Her left leg, extending from beneath a gown of midnight blue velvet torn along one side from centuries of use, bore an ornate brace, a masterwork of blackened silver and enchanted steel that ran from ankle to mid-thigh. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every surface etched with protective runes and strengthening sigils that pulsed with faint magical light. It had been a gift from her father, the Emperor, one of the only acknowledgments of her existence he'd ever made. The brace allowed her to walk after a fashion, though her gait would never be smooth, never be graceful like the predatory glide of her siblings. Scars traced along her bare arms, thin, precise lines that looked almost decorative until one realized they formed patterns. Not the random marks of battle but something more deliberate, more painful. Each scar represented a failed bonding ritual, a ceremony where a vampire was supposed to forge a blood connection with a partner, an ally, a companion who would stand beside them through the centuries. Seraphine had volunteered for 14 such rituals. 14 times she had offered her blood, her trust, her desperate hope for connection. 14 times she had been refused at the final moment, left bleeding and alone in ceremonial circles while her would-be partners walked away with excuses that all meant the same thing. She was not worth eternity's commitment. Tonight was the 15th attempt. "The bonding of blood and soul shall now commence," announced Lord Ravencroft, the master of ceremonies, his voice carrying the practiced disinterest of someone who had overseen thousands of these rituals and expected this one to end like all the others. He was an ancient vampire, so old his eyes had turned from red to silver, his face a mask that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Princess Seraphine Valdrath, 17th of her line, blood of the Crimson Emperor, seeks a companion to walk eternity's path. Who among the assembled would step forward? The silence that followed had texture, thick, oppressive, almost mocking. Seraphine sat perfectly still on her throne, hands folded in her lap with practiced composure, head held high despite the blindfold, despite knowing, always knowing, what came next. Her fingers trembled once, twice, then stilled as she forced control over her body that her circumstances denied her. Someone coughed. Another vampire shifted weight from one foot to another. Whispers began, carefully modulated to be audible to vampire hearing but maintaining the pretense of discretion. Poor thing. Such a shame about the bloodline. A blind vampire? How does she even hunt? I heard she's fed by servants like a fledgling. And the leg? One should know when to accept the final son rather than burden the court. The emperor only keeps her alive out of obligation. Even he won't look at her during councils. Imagine bonding with that for eternity. One might as well chain oneself to a corpse. Seraphine's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had learned long ago to school her expression into serene acceptance, to present the mask of royal dignity even as each word found its mark like silver arrows in her chest. She had centuries to practice this performance. She was 347 years old, still young by vampire standards, but old enough to have heard every possible variation of rejection. Lord Ravencroft cleared his throat. I shall ask once more. Who will step forward to? I will. The voice came from the back of the hall, near the massive doors that separated the vampire court from the rest of the palace. It was not the smooth, melodious voice of vampire nobility. It lacked the supernatural resonance that came from centuries of existence. It was impossibly a human voice, warm, mortal, and absolutely forbidden in this gathering. Every head turned. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly, followed by a wave of supernatural hissing that sounded like a nest of serpents awakening. A figure moved through the crowd, which parted not out of respect but out of sheer shock. The vampires drew back as if the person walking among them carried plague, their perfect faces twisted in disgust and disbelief. He was human, undeniably, obviously human. Perhaps 30 years old in mortal terms, which meant nothing and everything in a room full of immortals. He wore simple traveling clothes, a worn leather jacket over a white shirt, dark trousers tucked into boots that had walked many roads, a pack slung over one shoulder. His face was neither handsome nor plain, but possessed a quality of openness that seemed almost obscene in a court of beautiful predators. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, ordinary brown human eyes that would die when he died, held an expression of calm determination. He walked with the slight limp of someone who'd injured his right leg in the past and never fully recovered. Each step was deliberate, careful, yet he moved through the vampire court with neither the terror of prey nor the bravado of a fool. He simply walked as if he belonged, as if the hissing and the outrage around him were merely weather to be endured. Sacrilege, someone shouted. A human dares to enter the bonding hall? Guards, remove this creature before he contaminates the ceremony. But no guards moved. They couldn't technically. The rite of bonding was sacred, ancient, bound by laws older than the current empire. Any who volunteered to bond could not be refused hearing, no matter their nature. It was a law written in the founding blood of their race, when vampires had been few and desperate for any alliance that could ensure their survival. The law had never been revoked because no one had ever imagined it would be needed for this. The human reached the dais and, with movements that suggested he'd been schooled in courtly manners somewhere in his past, knelt before Seraphine's throne. He set his pack down carefully beside him, then placed his right hand over his heart in the traditional gesture of bonding supplication. Princess Seraphine Valdrath, he said, his voice steady despite the hundreds of predatory eyes fixed on his exposed neck. My name is Marcus Thorne. I am a wanderer, a cartographer, a human of no particular importance to anyone. I have traveled for 7 years seeking something I could not name. I believe I have found it. I volunteer to bond with you if you will have me. Seraphine's hands, which had remained folded and still through everything, suddenly clenched. Her head tilted slightly, angling toward the voice, and for the first time that evening, her mask of serenity cracked. Confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been hope flickered across her features before she suppressed them. You, her voice emerged soft, musical, laced with an accent from centuries past that made even simple words sound like poetry. "You are human." "I am," Marcus confirmed. "You understand what you propose?" "A bond between vampire and human it has not been done in over 1,000 years. The human partner receives extended life, yes, but they become tied to vampire nature. You would need blood to survive. You would be neither fully human nor vampire, but something between. You would watch your mortal friends and family age and die while you remained. You would be outcast from both our worlds." "I understand. You have heard the others. You know what they think of me. Defective. Cursed. Broken." Her voice remained steady, but the words cost her. "Why would you choose this?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, the entire court leaned forward despite themselves, desperate to hear the human's answer. "7 years ago," Marcus began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone telling a truth they'd carried for a long time, "I was a scholar in the merchant city of Astholm. I studied maps, explored historical routes, documented the world's forgotten places. I had colleagues, comfortable quarters, respect in my field. I had everything a mortal could want. Then one night I was working late in the archives when I found a journal, ancient, crumbling, written by a vampire scholar who'd traveled through human land centuries ago. Most of it was observations about human culture, but there was one entry that stopped me cold. The scholar wrote, 'I met a human child today who could not walk without aid, whose eyes saw nothing but darkness. The village elders said she was cursed, useless, better off abandoned. But when I spoke to her, I found a mind that could navigate by sound and touch better than most navigate by sight. She had memorized every story the village elders told, remembered every song, could identify anyone by their footsteps alone. She was not broken. She was simply different, and the world was too rigid to see her value. I wept that night, the first tears I have shed in 5 centuries, because I realized we immortals have become just as blind, just as rigid. We have lived so long we have forgotten how to see." Marcus looked up at Seraphine, though she could not see his face. "I never forgot those words. I left my position. I began to travel, to see the world with new eyes, to look for the things others dismissed. I learned that the most extraordinary people are often the ones society tries hardest to ignore. And 3 months ago, I heard rumors of a vampire princess, blind and disabled, who endured ceremony after ceremony of rejection with grace and dignity, who remained kind to servants when she had every reason for bitterness, who spent her nights in the palace library learning languages through touch reading so she could understand the histories of all the peoples her family ruled, vampire and human alike. I came to Valdrath to see if the rumors were true. I bribed a servant for access to the servants' halls. I heard you one night, helping a young attendant who was crying because she'd broken a valuable vase and feared punishment. You told her that objects could be replaced but people could not, that mistakes were how we learned, that she had worth beyond her service. Your voice was kind, patient, real. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" Seraphine whispered. "That you are not broken, princess. You are extraordinary. And if you'll have me, a human, a nothing, a man with no special talents except persistence and a willingness to see, I would consider it the greatest honor of my short mortal life to bond with you." The silence that fell over the grand hall was different now. Not the silence of anticipation or mockery, but the silence of shock so profound it stole even whisper. Seraphine sat frozen on her throne, her hands trembling in her lap. Her head turned slightly left, then right, as if searching for the trap, the cruel joke, the inevitable moment when this impossible offer would be revealed as mockery. But Marcus remained kneeling, patient, his heartbeat steady enough that vampire ears could verify his sincerity. "This is madness," Lord Ravenscroft finally said, his ancient voice cracking with disbelief. "The law may permit any volunteer, but surely—" "The law does not have exceptions," Seraphine said suddenly, her voice stronger now. She rose from her throne with effort, one hand gripping the armrest for support, her braced leg moving carefully as she stood. Her wings spread slightly for balance, and despite everything, the blindfold, the brace, the scars, she looked every inch a princess of the blood. "Master of ceremonies, you know the law as well as any. A volunteer has been made. The choice is mine. Your Highness, please reconsider, Ravencroft urged, abandoning formal protocol in his urgency. A human bond? The court will never accept. The court has never accepted me regardless, Seraphine cut him off, and there was steel in her voice now, the accumulated weight of 3 centuries of rejection transmuted into something harder than diamond. I have followed every rule, attended every ceremony, offered my blood and my trust 14 times to vampires who looked at me with disgust. Not one of them possessed the courage this human shows tonight. So yes, Master of Ceremonies. I accept Marcus Thorne's offer. Let the bonding proceed. The uproar was instantaneous. Vampires shouted objections, some calling for the Emperor, others demanding the human be removed regardless of law. But beneath the chaos, Marcus slowly rose from his kneeling position and extended his hand toward Seraphine. She hesitated only a moment, centuries of rejection warring with desperate hope, then reached out into empty space. Marcus stepped forward and gently took her trembling hand in his. Her fingers closed around his with surprising strength, as if she were drowning and he was the only solid thing in a world that had always refused her a place to stand. "Are you certain?" she whispered so quietly only he could hear it. "There is still time to walk away. I would not blame you." Marcus smiled, though she couldn't see it. She felt it, though, in the way his hand steadied hers. "I've never been more certain of anything, Princess. Let them talk. Let them rage. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in 347 years of existence, Seraphine Valdrath smiled, truly smiled, as tears began to seep from beneath her blindfold, dampening the crimson silk. The bonding chamber existed in the oldest section of the Eternal Palace, carved directly into the mountain's heart where the stone still remembered the world before vampires claimed dominion. The walls were natural rock, veined with minerals that gleamed like frozen blood in the light of 1,000 candles arranged in precise geometric patterns. The ceiling arched overhead in a natural dome, its surface covered in ancient runes that predated written language, symbols carved by the first vampires when they were still half-feral creatures desperate to forge bonds that would let them survive the hostile world. The chamber was circular, perhaps 60 feet in diameter, with a raised dais at the center. Upon that dais sat a stone altar weathered by millennia of use, its surface permanently stained with the mingled blood of 10,000 bonding rituals. Around the perimeter of the chamber stood the court vampires who had followed the unprecedented spectacle, filling the observation galleries carved into the walls. They watched with expressions ranging from disgust to morbid fascination, like spectators at an execution uncertain whether to look away or lean closer. The Emperor himself had not attended. This was interpreted by all present as the clearest possible statement of his opinion. Marcus and Seraphine stood before the altar, separated by mere inches but seemingly worlds apart, she from the eternal night, he from the temporary day. Lord Ravencroft stood opposite them, his ancient face still creased with disapproval, but he had sworn oaths older than empires to uphold bonding law. He would perform the ceremony correctly even if it offended every principle he held. "The right of blood and soul is not a union to be entered lightly," Ravencroft began, his voice resonating with ceremonial gravity. "It cannot be broken except by true death. It ties 2 beings together across the veil of mortality itself. The vampire partner shares their extended life, their strength, their connection to the night. The other partner shares their essence, their vitality, their anchor to the living world. Both become more, but both also become less, no longer wholly what they were but something new." He produced a ceremonial knife from his robes, its blade forged from meteoric iron and etched with the same ancient runes that covered the chamber ceiling. The weapon had drawn blood for the bonding rituals of 3 dynasties. "Princess Seraphine, extend your right hand." Seraphine did so, her hand remarkably steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. Marcus noticed how thin her fingers were, how delicate they appeared, but he also felt the strength in them from when she'd gripped his hand in the Grand Hall. Ravencroft placed the blade against her palm and drew it across in one smooth motion. Crimson blood welled immediately, darker than human blood, almost black in the candlelight. It dripped onto the altar with a soft patter, and the ancient stone seemed to drink it in, the runes around the chamber pulsing with responsive light. "Marcus Thorne, extend your right hand." Marcus obeyed, trying to ignore the predatory intensity of hundreds of vampire eyes fixed on his exposed veins. The knife felt cold against his skin, then sharp, a line of fire drawn across his palm. His blood joined Seraphine's on the altar, brighter, redder, steaming slightly in the cool chamber air. "Join hands over the altar," Ravencroft commanded. They did. Palm pressed to palm, vampire blood and human blood mingling, flowing together over the ancient stone. The moment their blood touched, Marcus felt it, a jolt like lightning running up his arm, through his chest, directly into his heart. He gasped. Seraphine's hand clenched as convulsively. "The blood recognizes," Ravencroft intoned, and there was surprise in his voice now. "The binding accepts. This is unexpected." In truth, it was more than unexpected. Bonding rituals were supposed to be simple. Blood mixed, words spoken, a mild connection forged. The intensity of what was happening, the way the chamber's runes were blazing with light, the way the candle flames were all bending toward the altar as if drawn by invisible wind, the way both Marcus and Seraphine were trembling. This was not normal. Ancient magic, older than the Empire, older than recorded history, was stirring. "Speak now the words of bonding," Ravencroft said, his usual bored tone replaced by something approaching awe. "Princess Seraphine first." Seraphine's voice emerged soft but clear, each word resonating with power she didn't know she possessed. "I offer my eternity to you, Marcus Thorne. My strength when you falter. My protection when you face danger. My truth when you seek guidance. My blood as your sustenance. My soul as your shelter. I am yours until the final darkness takes us both." The runes flared brighter. The blood on the altar began to glow. "Marcus Thorne," Ravencroft prompted, "speak your oath." Marcus had been given the traditional words to memorize, but standing here, feeling the impossible energy flowing between himself and this broken, beautiful princess who had suffered centuries of rejection with grace, the prepared speech felt inadequate. He spoke from his heart instead. "I offer my mortality to you, Seraphine Valdrath. My sight when you need eyes. My strength when you need support. My voice when you need advocacy. My belief when doubt surrounds you. My presence when loneliness threatens. I am yours until my heart beats its last, and if the universe permits, beyond even that." Something cracked, not physically but metaphysically. The bond between them snapped into place with such force that vampires in the observation galleries staggered backward. The candles all extinguished simultaneously, plunging the chamber into darkness broken only by the blazing runes and the nimbus of crimson light surrounding Marcus and Seraphine's joined hands. Then the light exploded outward. When vision returned, Marcus was on his knees, still clutching Seraphine's hand. She had collapsed as well, kneeling beside the altar, her blindfold askew, her wings spread wide and trembling. Both of them were breathing hard, even Seraphine, who technically didn't need to breathe except for speech. But something was different. Something fundamental had changed. Marcus looked at his free hand and saw faint traceries of light beneath his skin, like veins, but glowing softly with crimson luminescence. His hearing had sharpened. He could suddenly distinguish individual heartbeats among the vampires in the galleries, could hear stones settling in the palace walls, could hear insects moving in cracks in the rock. His sense of smell had intensified. The chamber now carried layers of scent he'd never detected before. Ancient blood, mineral deposits, the unique scent signature of every vampire present. Most striking, he could feel Seraphine, not just her hand in his, but her presence in his mind. Not thoughts exactly, but emotions, sensations, a connection that let him know with absolute certainty where she was in space relative to him, what she was feeling. She was terrified, hopeful, overwhelmed, clinging to his presence like a lifeline. He squeezed her hand gently, sending reassurance through the bond, and felt her terror ease slightly. Seraphine's experience was even more profound. For the first time in 347 years she could see. Not with her eyes, those were still sightless, still closed behind the blindfold. But through the bond, through Marcus's eyes, she was experiencing vision. It was disorienting, dizzying, filtered through a mortal's more limited perception but still miraculous. She saw the chamber, saw the stunned vampires in the galleries, saw the ancient altar covered in their mingled blood. Saw Marcus's face, warm brown eyes, strong features marked by care and kindness, looking at her with such concern and tenderness that it made her chest ache. She saw herself for the first time, reflected in his perception of her. Not broken. Not cursed. Beautiful in his eyes. Extraordinary. She began to cry again, but this time the tears were relief. "The bond is sealed," Ravencroft announced into the stunned silence, his voice shaken. "Marcus Thorne and Princess Seraphine Valdrath are bound in blood and soul. What has been joined cannot be separated except by death. It is done." He sounded like he was pronouncing a sentence rather than celebrating a union, but the law was clear. The ceremony was complete. Marcus helped Seraphine to her feet, supporting her carefully, instinctively adjusting for her braced leg without making it obvious. She leaned against him, still overwhelmed by the sudden influx of shared sensation. His solidity, his warmth, his beating heart that now sustained them both. "I can see through your eyes," she whispered in wonder. "I can feel your presence. Marcus, this is... I never imagined." "I know," he whispered back, because through the bond he did know. He felt her wonder, her fear, her fragile hope that this miracle wouldn't be snatched away. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The vampires in the galleries were beginning to murmur, voices rising in agitation. "This is an abomination. Human blood contaminating the royal line. The Emperor must intervene." Silence. The word cut through the noise like a blade, and shockingly it came from Seraphine. She straightened to her full height, one hand still gripping Marcus for support, the other raised imperiously. Her wings spread fully, 20 feet of magnificent membrane that caught the candlelight now that it was returning. Despite the blindfold, despite the brace, despite being the court's outcast, she looked like a princess addressing subjects. "I am 17th daughter of Emperor Valdrath, blood of the founding line, and I have completed the rite of blood and soul according to ancient law. By that same law, my bonded partner is now recognized as a member of House Valdrath, entitled to all protections and privileges thereof. You will address Marcus Thorne with the respect due to royal consort, or you will answer to bonding law." The vampires fell silent, shocked by her sudden authority. Marcus stared at her in amazement. This was not the meek, rejected princess who'd sat silently through mockery in the grand hall. This was someone who'd been waiting her entire life for a reason to stand up, to fight back, to claim her place. The bond had not given her strength, it had given her purpose. She turned her head toward him, and though she couldn't see him with her own eyes, through the bond she perceived his awe. "Come," she said softly. "Let us leave this place. We have much to discuss, and these walls carry too much judgment." Together, Marcus supporting Seraphine and Seraphine guiding them both through spatial awareness learned from centuries of blindness, they walked from the bonding chamber. The crowd parted before them, not out of respect but because no one wanted to acknowledge what had just occurred. As they passed through the massive doors and into the corridor beyond, Marcus heard Seraphine laugh, a small, breathless sound that carried 300 years of pent-up emotion. "I never thought I'd leave one of these ceremonies with someone beside me," she admitted. "I don't even know where to go now. My quarters aren't prepared for guests. I've never had guests." Marcus smiled. "Then I suppose we'll figure it out together. Isn't that what bonded partners do?" She squeezed his hand, and through their connection, he felt her answer more clearly than words could express. "Yes, together." Seraphine's quarters were located in the East Tower, the oldest, most isolated section of the Eternal Palace, far from the Emperor's grand halls and the luxurious chambers of her numerous siblings. The location was no accident. Out of sight meant out of mind, and the vampire court preferred to pretend she didn't exist. But as Marcus helped her through the winding corridors, lit by mage lights that flickered in ancient sconces, he found himself unexpectedly captivated by the tower's austere beauty. The walls were original stone, rough-hewn and honest, free from the oppressive grandeur that characterized the palace's central sections. Arrow-slit windows overlooked the mountain forests below, and through them the eternal night sky revealed more stars than Marcus had ever seen from anywhere else. "It's actually beautiful," he said aloud, forgetting for a moment that Seraphine had never seen her own home with her eyes. Through the bond, she experienced his wonder, and it made her pause mid-step. "Is it? I've only ever known it by touch and sound and what servants tell me. They always sounded apologetic, as if my quarters were a punishment." "They're wrong," Marcus said firmly. "This feels real. Unadorned. Honest. Like it's been here for millennia and will remain for millennia more, while all the fancy decoration in the palace proper will crumble to dust. It feels like you." She didn't respond, but through the bond, Marcus felt a burst of emotion so intense it nearly staggered him. Gratitude, surprise, and something deeper that she didn't yet have words for. They reached a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Seraphine produced a large iron key from a pocket in her gown and unlocked it herself, her fingers finding the keyhole by touch with practiced ease. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges, and they entered her sanctuary. The chamber beyond was large but surprisingly sparse. The furnishings were functional rather than ornate. A massive bed with simple dark curtains, a wardrobe carved from ancient oak, a writing desk with a chair positioned near a window. What dominated the room was books. Shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, packed with volumes of every size and age. But these weren't ordinary books. They were texts in the raised alphabet that allowed Seraphine to read by touch. Marcus moved closer and saw that the books covered an astounding range of subjects. Human history, vampire genealogies, maps of territories both human and immortal, linguistic studies, philosophical treatises, even what appeared to be technical manuals for crafts and trades. "I collect knowledge," Seraphine explained, following his attention through the bond. "Since I cannot participate in court life, cannot hunt with my siblings, cannot do any of the things vampires consider worthwhile, I read. I've learned 17 languages this way, memorized the complete history of every major human kingdom, studied subjects my family considers beneath their dignity. No one bothers me here, so I fill the time by trying to understand the world I cannot see." Marcus turned to her, and the sadness in his voice was genuine. "They're fools. Every single one of them. Do they realize you probably know more about the world than any of them? Knowledge without power to use it is just collection," she said quietly, moving to a chair by the window and settling into it with visible relief. Her braced leg extended stiffly in front of her. "I know the trade routes between human kingdoms, but I'll never travel them. I know 6 dialects of the northern languages, but I'll never speak to the people who use them. I know the proper diplomatic protocols for 40 different courts, but I'll never be allowed to represent House Valdrath in any of them." She gestured vaguely at her blindfold, her brace. "I am decoration, Marcus. A cautionary tale parents tell their children. See what happens when bloodlines are weak? See what happens when the founder's blessing skips someone. I exist, but I do not participate." Marcus pulled another chair close to hers and sat down, taking her hand again. The physical contact strengthened their bond connection, and he projected his thoughts as clearly as he could. "That changes now." Seraphine's head tilted toward him, surprise flowing through the bond. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're not alone anymore," Marcus said aloud. "You have a bonded partner now. Someone who can be your eyes when you need them, your voice when necessary, your representative when your family won't allow you to represent yourself. You have all this knowledge, let's use it." "Use it for what?" she asked, and there was a dangerous note in her voice, dangerous because it was hope, and hope had hurt her so many times before. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. He'd traveled extensively, seen the tensions between human and vampire territories, witnessed the small conflicts that erupted when neither side understood the other. An idea was forming, audacious and probably foolish, but no more foolish than a human volunteering to bond with a vampire princess. "The world is fracturing," he said slowly. "Human kingdoms don't trust vampire territories. Vampire lords view humans as cattle at best, threats at worst. There are constant border skirmishes, failed negotiations, trade disputes that turn violent. Everyone's so busy being proud and superior that no one's actually trying to understand the other side." He squeezed her hand. But you understand both sides, Seraphine. You've studied human cultures with more respect than most humans show them. You know vampire politics from the inside, even if they've excluded you from participating. And now you have something else, a bond with a human, the first in 1,000 years. We're living proof that cooperation between our peoples is possible. You think they'll listen to us? Skepticism colored her tone. The court that just spent the evening mocking me? The human kingdoms that fear and hate vampires? No, Marcus admitted. Not at first. Probably not for a long time. But Seraphine, neither of us has anything to lose. You've been rejected by your court. I've been outcast the moment I bonded with you. I can never return to normal human society now. We're both outcast. So why not be outcast with purpose? Through the bond, he felt her mind working, turning the idea over, testing it for flaws and finding none that weren't already present in their current circumstances. You're suggesting we become, what? Negotiators? Ambassadors? I'm suggesting we become a bridge, Marcus said. Maybe we can't fix everything. Maybe we can't even fix much. But we can try. We can use your knowledge and my eyes. Your status and my human perspective. We can go places neither of us could go alone. Seraphine was quiet for a long time, her sightless eyes pointed toward the window, toward the eternal night beyond. Marcus could feel her emotions through the bond, fear warring with hope, resignation battling against the desperate desire to believe things could be different. Finally she spoke. I have spent 347 years in this tower, Marcus. Reading about the world, dreaming of seeing it, knowing I never would. My family has made it abundantly clear that I am an embarrassment to be hidden, not a representative to be displayed. Even if we wanted to do this, they would never allow it. Would they stop us? She turned her head toward him sharply. What? Would they physically stop us? Marcus pressed. You're bonded now, which means you have certain rights under vampire law that even the Emperor can't simply revoke. And I'm bonded to royalty, which, if I understood Lord Ravencroft's explanation correctly, gives me legal protections too. Could they prevent us from leaving the palace? From traveling? From speaking to other territories? Seraphine's fingers tightened on his. Legally, no. Bonded pairs have autonomy under ancient law. It was written that way to prevent powerful vampire lords from controlling their bonded partners. But Marcus, they could make things very difficult. They could refuse resources, deny us access to House Valdrath's diplomatic channels, spread word that we're rogues not to be trusted. Let them, Marcus said, and there was steel in his voice now. Seraphine, I didn't volunteer for this bonding because I wanted an easy life. I did it because I saw someone extraordinary being treated as worthless, and I couldn't stand it anymore. If your family wants to make things difficult, fine. We'll do it without their blessing. We'll do it despite their opposition. We'll prove them wrong about you even if it takes decades. Through the bond, he felt the exact moment something inside her broke. Not in a bad way, but like ice breaking up in spring, like walls crumbling that had been built to protect a heart that had stopped believing protection was necessary because nothing worth protecting could grow there anyway. She pulled her hand free from his, and for a moment, Marcus feared he'd pushed too hard, too fast. But then she reached up with trembling fingers and untied the crimson blindfold, letting it fall away. Her eyes were extraordinary. Completely white, no iris, no pupil. Just luminous white that glowed with soft crimson light bleeding through from somewhere internal. They were the eyes of a creature who existed in eternal darkness, whose sight had turned inward when the outer world was denied to her. They were beautiful. I want to try, she whispered, those sightless eyes pointed in his general direction, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Marcus, I have been so tired for so long. Tired of pretending I don't hurt when they mock me. Tired of acting like I don't care about their rejection. Tired of being grateful for scraps when I am a princess of the blood. I want to try. Even if we fail. Even if we make fools of ourselves. I want to try something instead of just enduring. Marcus smiled and reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement in case she wanted to pull back. When she didn't, he gently wiped tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. Then we'll try, he said simply. Together. She leaned forward, and Marcus met her halfway, and they embraced, Vampire and human, princess and wanderer, two outcasts who had found each other in a world that wanted neither of them. Through the bond, their emotions tangled together until neither could tell where one ended and the other began. Determination, fear, hope, gratitude, the beginning of something that might, given time and care, become love. Outside the window, the eternal night continued as it had for 3 millennia, but for the first time in 347 years, Seraphine Valdrath felt like she could see dawn on the horizon. The following evening, for in the eternal palace all time was measured in darkness, Marcus woke to the strange sensation of not being alone in his own body. The bond with Seraphine hummed at the edge of his awareness, a constant presence that informed him she was near, calm, currently reading something by touch. He sat up in the small guest chamber Seraphine had insisted he take adjacent to her quarters. "You need proper rest," she'd argued, "and having someone sleep in the same room when I'm not accustomed to it would be distracting." The room was simple but comfortable, and most importantly, it was his, probably the first thing in the palace that belonged to him by right rather than invitation. Marcus dressed in fresh clothes from his travel pack and stepped into Seraphine's main chamber. He found her at her desk, fingers moving rapidly over a large book written in raised script, her expression intent with concentration. "Good evening," she said without looking up, and Marcus realized with a start that she'd sensed his presence through the bond before he'd even opened the door. "There are provisions on the table, bread, cheese, dried fruit. I asked the kitchen to send something appropriate for human consumption." Marcus moved to the table and found a surprisingly generous spread. "Have you eaten?" he asked, then immediately felt foolish. Vampires didn't eat food. "I fed earlier," Seraphine said matter-of-fact. "Blood from the palace stores. Don't worry, it's donated from paid volunteers, not taken from prisoners or thralls. The Emperor maintains certain standards, at least in that regard." Marcus sat down with his breakfast, watching her work. In the better light of evening, he could see just how extensive her library was. There had to be thousands of books here, a lifetime of collected knowledge for a being who had lifetimes to spare. "What are you reading?" he asked. "A historical account of the Merchant Princes Coalition, written about 200 years ago," she replied, still not looking up. "Human kingdoms that managed to maintain independence from vampire territories through economic interdependence rather than military might. I thought it might be relevant to what we discussed last night." So she'd been serious. Relief flooded through Marcus, followed quickly by nervousness. They were really going to do this? Try to become bridges between worlds that wanted nothing to do with each other? "Where do we even start?" he wondered aloud. Seraphine finally lifted her fingers from the page and turned in her chair to face him. She'd put the blindfold back on, he noticed, a habit of self-consciousness she probably wasn't even aware of. "We start small. Local. There's a human town at the base of the mountain, Greywater Falls. It's technically within House Valdrath's territory, which means it pays tribute, but the relationship is tense. The town council makes their required payments, but there's been talk of rebellion. Meanwhile, my father's administrators keep demanding higher tribute, which pushes the humans closer to revolt." "A powder keg," Marcus observed. "Precisely. If it explodes, the Emperor will send troops. The town will be destroyed, its people scattered or enslaved. But if someone could mediate, find a compromise." "You want to go there?" Marcus realized. "Talk to both sides." "We need to start somewhere," Seraphine said, and there was vulnerability in her voice. "It's not grand. It won't change the world. But if we can prevent one atrocity, help one town, maybe prove that dialogue is possible." Marcus finished his breakfast quickly and stood. "Then we go. Today. Now before you lose your nerve or I lose mine." Seraphine blinked in surprise, and through the bond, Marcus felt her flicker between terror and exhilaration. "Just leave? Without permission? You said we legally can. So we do." Marcus moved to his travel pack and began checking his supplies. "Unless you need time to prepare? I'm used to traveling light, but if you need—" "I've never left the palace," Seraphine interrupted quietly. "Not once in 347 years. I was born here. I will likely die here. The world beyond these walls is just words on pages to me. Marcus stopped packing and went to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level despite her blindfold. Then it's past time you experienced it. Seraphine, those words on pages? They don't do justice to reality. The world is vast and terrifying and beautiful, and you deserve to see it. Through my eyes if necessary, but you deserve it. She reached out tentatively and he took her hand, letting her feel his presence, his certainty. I'm afraid, she admitted. So am I, Marcus said honestly. I've never tried to mediate a political crisis. I've never traveled with a vampire princess. I don't know if we'll succeed or fail spectacularly. But I know that staying here in this tower, surrounded by books about a world you'll never see, that's the worst failure of all. Seraphine's hand tightened on his. Then with visible effort she stood. Her braced leg moved carefully but she stood straight and proud. Help me pack, she said. And Marcus? Thank you for not letting me hide. They spent the next hour preparing for departure. Seraphine had few personal possessions. Some changes of clothing, several small books she refused to leave behind, a ceremonial dagger that had been a naming day gift and was the only acknowledgement of her existence several siblings had ever made. Marcus helped her select practical traveling clothes, and when she emerged from behind a dressing screen, he was struck by the transformation. Gone was the torn ceremonial gown. Instead, she wore dark traveling leathers similar to his own, tailored to accommodate her wings and brace. Her silver-white hair was bound in a practical braid. She looked less like a tragic princess and more like what she should have been, a capable, intelligent woman ready to face challenges. How do I look? She asked, and the uncertainty in her voice reminded Marcus that she'd never be able to verify her appearance in a mirror. Like someone who belongs in the world, not locked away from it, he said. She smiled at that, small but genuine. They were nearly ready to leave when the chamber door burst open without warning. 6 vampires entered in a rush of supernatural speed, palace guards in ceremonial armor, hands on sword hilts but not yet drawn. Behind them came a figure Marcus recognized from palace gossip. Prince Varantis, Seraphine's second oldest brother, commander of the Emperor's military forces. Varantis was everything Seraphine was not. Tall, powerfully built, with the kind of flawless features that made mortals weep and the golden eyes of an ancient bloodline undiluted by weakness. His presence radiated authority, and when he spoke, his voice carried the expectation of immediate obedience. Seraphine. Step away from the human. Seraphine had gone very still beside Marcus, but through the bond he felt her emotions, not fear but resignation. This was what she'd expected. Opposition, control, the world reminding her she was not free despite what the law said. Hello, Varantis, she said calmly. I don't recall inviting you to my quarters. Don't be difficult, her brother said, moving further into the room. His guards fanned out, blocking the exit. The entire court is talking about what happened last night. A human? Really, Seraphine? I know you were desperate, but that was humiliating for House Valdrath. The bond was legal, Marcus said, stepping slightly forward to put himself between Varantis and Seraphine. It was probably futile. The prince could kill him in seconds, but he'd be damned if he'd hide behind her. Completed according to ancient law. If you have an objection, take it up with the master of ceremonies. Varantis's golden eyes fixed on Marcus with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. I'm told you're educated, human. That you can read, that you've traveled, that you're not entirely ignorant. So surely you understand that just because something is legal doesn't make it wise. My sister has limitations. She requires special care which the palace provides. Taking her out into the world, subjecting her to danger and hardship she's not equipped to handle, that would be irresponsible. I'm standing right here, Varantis, Seraphine said coldly. Stop discussing me as if I'm a child or an invalid who can't speak for herself. You've barely left this tower in 3 centuries, Varantis countered, finally acknowledging her directly. Now suddenly one night with a bonded human and you're planning to, what? Travel? Play at diplomacy? Seraphine, be realistic. You'll be hurt or worse and it will reflect badly on all of us. You mean it will be embarrassing? Seraphine shot back and Marcus felt anger burning through the bond now. centuries of accumulated resentment finally finding voice. Just like my existence has always embarrassed you. Just like you've spent 300 years pretending I don't exist because looking at me reminds you that vampires can be imperfect. That's not, Varantis began, but Seraphine cut him off. Don't lie. Not now. You never visited this tower unless Father commanded it. You never spoke to me at court. You never defended me when the others mocked me. The only time you've ever cared about my existence is when it might inconvenience you. Her voice was shaking now, but not with fear, with fury. So forgive me, brother, if I don't particularly value your sudden concern for my well-being. Varantis's expression hardened. I am trying to protect you. No, Marcus said quietly, and something in his tone made even the prince pause. You're trying to control her. There's a difference. Protection would have looked like support, like actually caring about her welfare these past 3 centuries. This is making sure the embarrassment stays locked away where it won't cause problems. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Varantis took a step toward Marcus, and the guards' hands tightened on their sword hilts. Careful, human, the prince said softly, dangerously. Bond or no bond, there are limits to the disrespect I'll tolerate. Then tolerate this, Seraphine said, moving to stand beside Marcus, her hand finding his and gripping it tightly. Marcus is my bonded partner, which makes him family under law. You will treat him with the respect due that position, or I will file formal grievance with the Council of Bloodlines, and you know as well as I do that the Emperor cannot afford political embarrassment right now with the Northern Covens threatening secession. Varantis stared at his sister as if seeing her for the first time. This was not the meek, quiet Seraphine who'd endured mockery in silence. This was someone who'd found a reason to fight. You've changed, he said finally. No, Seraphine corrected. I've stopped accepting your definition of who I should be. There's a difference. For a long moment, the chamber was silent except for breathing. 6 guards, 1 prince, 1 human, and 1 vampire princess who had finally discovered her spine. Then Varantis did something unexpected. He laughed. Not mockingly, but with what sounded like genuine surprise. Very well, he said, stepping back and gesturing for his guards to lower their hands from their weapons. Far be it from me to stand in the way of whatever this is. But Seraphine, understand this. If you leave the palace, you do so without House Valdrath's protection. If you run into trouble, don't expect Father to send help. You'll be on your own. I've been on my own for 347 years, Seraphine replied. At least now I have company. Varantis looked between them, the blind vampire princess and the human wanderer, and shook his head in what might have been admiration or pity or both. Try not to start a war, he said, then turned and left, his guards following. When the door closed behind them, Seraphine's legs nearly gave out. Marcus caught her, supporting her weight as tremors ran through her body, not fear but the aftermath of adrenaline, the shock of finally confronting family that had dismissed her for centuries. I can't believe I said those things to him, she whispered. You were magnificent, Marcus said firmly. Absolutely magnificent. She laughed, slightly hysterical, then straightened with effort. We should go. Before I lose my nerve. Before someone else decides to stop us. Marcus grabbed their packs, helped Seraphine settle hers comfortably across her back in a way that didn't interfere with her wings, and together they left the tower chamber. They made their way through palace corridors, and to Marcus's surprise, no one stopped them. Servants averted their eyes. Guards pretended not to see them. Word had clearly spread. The outcast princess and her human bond were leaving, and the court had collectively decided it wasn't their problem. They reached the grand entrance, those massive doors that opened onto the mountain road leading down from the Eternal Palace. Marcus pushed them open, and for the first time in her existence, Seraphine Valdrath stepped beyond the threshold of her prison. The night air hit them, cool and fresh, carrying scents of pine forest and distant water. Through the bond, Marcus felt Seraphine's overwhelming response. Terror, wonder, disbelief, joy so intense it bordered on pain. The world is so vast, she whispered, perceiving through his eyes the forest stretching below them, the mountain peaks surrounding them, the endless star-filled sky above. Yes, Marcus agreed. And we're going to see all of it. Together. He offered his arm and she took it, and together they descended the mountain road, leaving the eternal palace behind, two outcasts on their way to try changing a world that had rejected them both. The descent from the eternal palace took most of the night. The road was ancient, carved into the mountainside centuries ago by the first vampires who'd claimed this territory, and it wound back and forth in switchbacks that made the journey long but manageable even for someone with Seraphine's mobility challenges. Marcus found himself constantly amazed by how well she navigated despite her blindness and braced leg. 300 years of living in her own darkness had taught her to read the world through sound, touch, and spatial awareness. She could tell when the path narrowed by the way wind moved around them, could sense obstacles by subtle changes in air pressure, could identify different types of stone beneath their feet by texture alone. What she couldn't do was see the view, so Marcus described everything for her. The forest below us is mostly evergreens, pine and fir from what I can tell. They're old-growth trees, probably several hundred years old, so tall their tops disappear into shadow. There's a river cutting through the valley, I can see it reflecting starlight. It's beautiful, Seraphine. Wild and untouched, like the world before cities. Through the bond, she experienced his wonder, and her hand tightened on his arm. Tell me more. Tell me everything. I've read descriptions, but it's not the same. So Marcus talked, describing the texture of bark on the ancient trees they passed, the way nocturnal birds called from branches, the distant sound of the river becoming louder as they descended. He described the shift from bare mountain stone to alpine meadows, from meadows to proper forest, from forest to the cleared lands surrounding human habitation. Dawn was still hours away when they reached Greywater Falls. The town was larger than Marcus had expected, perhaps 3,000 inhabitants, based on the number of structures he could see. It had grown up around a massive waterfall that gave the settlement its name, where a mountain river plunged over a cliff into a churning pool before continuing down valley. The water's roar was constant, a backdrop to all other sounds. The town was clearly prosperous but defensive. Strong walls surrounded the central district, and Marcus could see guard towers spaced along them. The buildings were well maintained, built from local stone and timber, but there were also signs of tension. Torches burning at every corner despite the late hour, guards patrolling in groups, window shutters closed and barred. This was a town expecting trouble. We should find lodging, Marcus said quietly. Somewhere we can observe, get a sense of the situation before we approach the town council. There, Seraphine said, pointing with unexpected accuracy toward a building near the town's entrance. The sound signature suggests it's larger than the surrounding structures, probably an inn. And I can smell food cooking. They're still serving, which means they're accustomed to late travelers. Marcus stared at her. How did you? I've read extensively about human town layouts, she said with a small smile. Inns are almost always positioned near entrances for traveler convenience. And my other senses compensate for what I can't see. Shall we? The inn proved to be exactly what Seraphine had predicted. A large, sturdy building with a painted sign declaring it, the Roaring Falls. Light spilled from windows, and the smell of cooking meat and baking bread made Marcus realize just how hungry he was. They entered together and conversation stopped. The common room held perhaps 30 people. Laborers in work clothes, merchants in travel-stained finery, a few farmers in homespun. All of them turned to stare at the odd pair. A human man in traveling leathers supporting a pale, ethereal woman with massive wings, a braced leg and a blindfold. A vampire. In their inn. In their town. The silence stretched taut enough to break. Then the innkeeper, a large woman with graying hair and arms like tree trunks, stepped forward from behind the bar. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her hand rested on a cudgel hanging from her belt. We don't want trouble, she said flatly. Marcus raised his free hand peacefully. Neither do we. We're travelers seeking a room and a meal. We can pay in Empire silver or human coin, whichever you prefer. A vampire wanting to pay for lodging, someone muttered. Since when do the bloodsuckers pay for anything? They just take. Seraphine's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Through the bond, Marcus felt her hurt. not at the insult but at the automatic hatred, the assumption that she was here to harm them. "My companion is Lady Seraphine," Marcus said clearly, projecting his voice so everyone in the common room could hear. "Daughter of House Valdrath, yes, but also the first vampire in 1,000 years to bond with a human partner. That would be me. We're not here as conquerors or tax collectors. We're here to help if you'll let us." The innkeeper's eyes narrowed. "Help with what?" "With whatever's making everyone in this town look like they're expecting a siege," Marcus replied. "You're paying tribute to House Valdrath, but it's not enough, is it? They're demanding more. And you're considering refusing, which will bring down the Emperor's wrath. You're caught between financial ruin and military destruction. We'd like to prevent both." The common room remained silent, but now the quality of the silence had changed. People were listening, evaluating, trying to decide if this was a trick. "Why would a vampire princess care about human problems?" the innkeeper asked. Seraphine spoke for the first time, her voice soft but carrying clearly, "Because I've spent 3 centuries being treated as worthless by my own people. I know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be seen as less than, to have no voice in decisions that affect your life. I don't want to be part of a system that does that to others." She paused, then added, "And because it's the right thing to do. Shouldn't that be reason enough?" The innkeeper studied them both for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "1 room, 2nd floor. 2 silver. Meals included. But I'm holding you to your word, no trouble. If you start anything vampire bonding or not, you'll answer to the whole town." "Fair enough," Marcus agreed. They paid, received a key, and were directed to a table in the corner. As they sat, conversation slowly resumed around them, but Marcus noticed people kept glancing their direction, whispers passing between tables. A serving girl, barely 15, trying to look brave, brought them food: roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables and herb butter. She set the plates down quickly, avoiding looking directly at Seraphine. "Thank you," Seraphine said gently, and the girl jumped as if she'd been struck. "You're welcome," she managed, then fled back to the kitchen. Marcus cut the chicken into smaller pieces and began describing the meal to Seraphine, guiding her hand to the locations of different foods. She ate with careful precision, obviously self-conscious about managing table manners she couldn't monitor visually. "They're terrified of you," Marcus murmured. "I know," Seraphine replied quietly. "I can hear their heartbeats elevating when I move. Smell their fear sweat. They expect me to attack them, to use vampire powers to subjugate them. They have no reason to trust me. So we earn their trust," Marcus said. "Starting tomorrow. First, we need to understand the situation fully. Then we figure out how to fix it." They finished their meal in relative silence, then retreated to their room. It was simple but clean. 1 large bed, a wash basin, a window overlooking the town square. Seraphine stood by that window for a long time, her head tilted as she listened to the sounds of the town settling for what remained of the night. "I can hear arguments in some of the houses," she said softly. "Families fighting about money, about whether to stay or flee, about what to do when the next tribute collector comes. This town is fracturing under the pressure." Marcus joined her at the window. "Then we don't have much time. If things fall apart before we can help, people will die, either from vampire reprisal or from starvation if they can't pay the tribute." "No pressure then," Seraphine said with dark humor. They prepared for rest. Marcus taking the bed, Seraphine insisting she'd be comfortable in a chair because vampires didn't need sleep the same way humans did. But Marcus wouldn't hear of it, and eventually they compromised with both of them in the bed, a careful foot of space between them, both hyper-aware of the other's presence through the bond. Just before Marcus drifted into sleep, he felt Seraphine's hand find his in the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing me here. For not letting me hide." He squeezed her hand. "Always." And connected by touch and bond, the outcast princess and the wandering human slept while outside. A town held its breath and wondered what morning would bring. Morning came with the sound of the waterfall and the gradual awakening of a town that ran on daylight hours. Marcus woke to find Seraphine already up, standing by the window with her face turned toward the glass as if she could sense the sunlight beyond even if she couldn't see it. "Sunrise," she said softly as Marcus stirred. "I've read about it 1,000 times but never experienced it. What does it look like?" Marcus joined her, looking out at the town bathed in golden light. "Imagine warmth made visible. The sky goes from deep blue to orange to gold to pale blue as the sun climbs. Everything becomes sharp and clear, shadows retreating. Colors that looked muted in darkness suddenly become vibrant. It's like the world waking up and remembering how to be beautiful." Through the bond, she experienced his perception of the sunrise, and tears slipped from beneath her blindfold. "It's nothing like the books described." "Books rarely are," Marcus agreed gently. They had breakfast in the common room, the same suspicious stares, the same careful distance maintained by the other patrons. But Marcus noticed something new: curiosity. People were watching them more openly now, especially watching how Marcus and Seraphine interacted, how he described the food to her, how she moved with confidence despite her blindness. After breakfast, Marcus approached the innkeeper. "Lady Seraphine and I would like to speak with the town council. Would you know how to arrange that?" The innkeeper, who'd introduced herself as Marta the previous night, gave him a skeptical look. "The council's not exactly eager to meet with vampire representatives. Last time one came, he threatened to burn the town if tribute wasn't doubled." "We're not here to threaten," Marcus assured her. "We're here to find a solution that works for everyone. But we can't help if we don't understand the full situation." Marta studied them both, then sighed. "Council meets at midday in the town hall. I'll send word you're requesting an audience. But don't expect a warm welcome." "Warmth isn't required," Seraphine said. "Willingness to talk is enough." Midday found them approaching the town hall, a sturdy stone building at the center of Greywater Falls. A crowd had gathered. Word had spread that the vampire princess was requesting a meeting, and half the town wanted to see what would happen. Marcus felt Seraphine tense beside him as she sensed the crowd through sound and smell. He squeezed her hand reassuringly, projecting calm through their bond, and together they entered the hall. The council chamber was a large room with a horseshoe-shaped table where 7 people sat. 5 men, 2 women, all middle-aged or older, all wearing expressions ranging from hostile to fearful. At the center sat a gray-bearded man who Marcus assumed was the council head. "I am Elder Rothgar," the man confirmed. "You requested this meeting. Speak your piece but be quick about it. We have actual town business to attend to." Marcus stepped forward. "Elder Rothgar, council members, thank you for seeing us. I am Marcus Thorne, and this is Lady Seraphine Valdrath. We understand Greywater Falls is facing pressure from House Valdrath regarding tribute payments. We'd like to help mediate a solution." "Mediate?" One of the women, sharp-featured with intelligent eyes, leaned forward. "You're from House Valdrath. You're here to squeeze us for more money, make it sound reasonable, then destroy us if we refuse. We're not fools." "Councillor Brennan speaks truth," Rothgar added. "House Valdrath has bled this town dry for 2 decades. Each year the tribute increases. Each year we have less for ourselves. Our children go hungry so we can feed vampire greed. Now you bring a princess here, think we'll be impressed by royalty and give you whatever you demand." Seraphine spoke, her voice carrying clearly, "Elder Rothgar, I understand your anger. But I need you to understand something. I have never been part of House Valdrath's governance. My father and siblings consider me an embarrassment, a defective heir who should remain hidden. I have spent 3 centuries locked in a tower, reading about the world, learning about injustice, unable to do anything about it. This," she gestured between herself and Marcus, "is the first time I've had any agency, any power to act. And I choose to use it to help, not to harm." "Pretty words," another counselor muttered. "Then let me offer more than words," Seraphine said. "Let me see the tribute records. Let me understand exactly what House Valdrath is demanding and what Greywater Falls can actually afford to pay. Then let me use my position, such as it is, to negotiate something sustainable." "Why would you do that?" Councillor Brennan asked suspiciously. "What do you gain?" "Hope," Seraphine said simply. Hope that vampires and humans can coexist without one dominating the other. Hope that my people can learn to value partnership over predation. Hope that I can be more than a cautionary tale about bloodline weakness. If I can help here, maybe I can help elsewhere. Maybe I can prove that another way is possible. The council members exchanged glances. Finally, Elder Hrothgar spoke. You're asking us to trust a vampire. No, Marcus interjected. She's asking you to trust that she's telling the truth about being an outcast who wants to help. Look at her, Elder. Really look. Does she look like someone who's benefited from vampire rule? Does she look like someone the Emperor would send as his representative? Hrothgar did look at Seraphine's worn traveling clothes, her braced leg, her blindfold, the way she stood with quiet dignity despite having every reason for bitterness. What would this mediation involve? He asked cautiously. First, show us the tribute demands and your actual financial records, Marcus said. We need to understand the gap between what's demanded and what's possible. Then Seraphine will draft a proposal, one that ensures House Valdrath still receives tribute, but at a level that allows Greywater Falls to survive and even prosper. She'll present it to her father. And if the Emperor refuses? Then at least we tried, Seraphine said. And you'll know exactly where you stand. But Elder Hrothgar, the alternative is doing nothing until the situation explodes. Either you'll rebel and be crushed, or you'll starve trying to meet impossible demands. What do you have to lose by letting us try? The council deliberated in hushed whispers for several minutes. Finally Hrothgar nodded. Very well. Counselor Brennan, bring the records. But understand this, Lady Seraphine, we're trusting you on thin ice. If this is a trap, if you use our financial information against us, you'll have made enemies of every human in this region. Understood, Seraphine said gravely. They spent the rest of the day deep in financial records. Counselor Brennan proved to be the town's treasurer, and she had meticulous documentation going back decades. The picture that emerged was damning. House Valdrath's tribute demands had indeed increased every year, currently standing at nearly 60% of the town's total productivity. Greywater Falls was an agricultural and lumber town. They produced grain, timber, and some metalwork, but they couldn't sustain the current extraction rate. This is unsustainable, Seraphine said after hours of Marcus reading numbers to her and watching her calculate in her head with frightening speed. At this rate, Greywater Falls will collapse within 3 years. Either the people will starve, or they'll abandon the town entirely. Tell us something we don't know, Brennan said bitterly. But it's also unnecessary, Seraphine continued. House Valdrath doesn't need this much tribute. My father's treasury is vast, and this town provides only a tiny fraction of imperial income. The demands are excessive because the administrators who collect tribute are corrupt. They inflate demands, skim off the top, and pocket the difference. The Emperor likely has no idea what's actually being extracted. Can you prove that? Hrothgar asked. With the right documentation, yes. Seraphine turned her head toward Marcus. We need to visit House Valdrath's local administrative post. Cross-reference what they claim to be collecting with what Greywater Falls actually pays. The discrepancy will reveal the corruption. The administrative post is 10 miles north, Brennan said. But they won't just hand over their records to you. They will to a princess of the blood, Seraphine said with quiet steel in her voice. I may be an outcast, but I still have authority over my father's servants when I choose to use it. Marcus smiled. This was the Seraphine he'd hoped to see, confident, capable, using her intelligence and status as weapons against injustice. They left immediately, borrowing horses from the town. Marcus rode competently, while Seraphine managed surprisingly well for someone who'd never ridden before. Her supernatural balance and ability to sense the horse's movements through vibration and sound made up for her lack of sight. The administrative post was a fortified manor house where a vampire lord named Draven oversaw a tribute collection for the southern territories. When Marcus and Seraphine arrived and announced themselves, they were met by a sneering functionary who looked at Seraphine with barely concealed contempt. Princess Seraphine. How unexpected. To what do we owe this visit? I'm conducting an audit of tribute collection on behalf of the Emperor, Seraphine said coolly, the lie emerging smoothly. I'll need to see all records for Greywater Falls for the past 10 years. The functionary's sneer faltered. An audit? I wasn't informed. Because it's a surprise audit, Seraphine said. Surely you have nothing to hide? Unless you'd prefer I report to my father that you obstructed a royal investigation? That did it. No functionary wanted to explain to the emperor why they denied his daughter, even his least favorite daughter, access to official records. Within an hour, Marcus and Seraphine were alone in an office with 10 years of tribute documentation. What they found was damning. Look at this, Marcus said, reading columns of numbers by lamplight. Greywater Falls paid 15,000 silver last year. But the records sent to the Imperial Treasury show only 8,000 silver received. That's a difference of 7,000 silver, nearly 50% of the tribute, that never made it to the Emperor. It went into Lord Draven's pockets, Seraphine said grimly. And I'm willing to bet every town in his jurisdiction shows similar discrepancies. He's been systematically robbing my father and blaming human towns for underpayment, which justifies increasing demands, which lets him steal more. This is the evidence we need, Marcus said. With this, you can go to your father, show him he's being cheated, and propose a revised tribute system that's actually sustainable. They copied the relevant documents by hand, Marcus writing while Seraphine dictated from memory, having absorbed the numbers with frightening accuracy. By the time they finished, dawn was approaching, and they needed to return to Greywater Falls before Lord Draven realized what they'd discovered. They rode hard through the remaining darkness, and Marcus felt Seraphine's exhilaration through the bond. This was the first time she'd ever used her intelligence and status for something meaningful, and the high of it was intoxicating. We did it, she laughed as they rode. We actually found proof. We can fix this, Marcus. We can save that town. You did it, Marcus corrected. I just took notes. That was all you. They reached Greywater Falls as the sun rose, immediately convening another meeting with the town council. When they presented their findings, proof of Lord Draven's corruption, calculations showing what fair tribute would actually look like, the room erupted. You found this? Councillor Brennan asked, disbelief and hope warring in her voice. We did, Marcus confirmed. And more than that, Lady Seraphine is prepared to take this directly to the Emperor, to expose the corruption and propose a new tribute structure. 30% of productivity instead of 60%, with provisions for annual review based on harvest yields. The Emperor would accept that? Elder Hrothgar asked. He'll accept not being robbed by his own administrators, Seraphine said. My father values efficiency above all else. When he learns Lord Draven has been stealing from the Imperial Treasury for years, heads will roll, possibly literally. And when I present a solution that maintains tribute income while preventing future corruption, he'll implement it just to avoid future embarrassment. When do you leave for the Eternal Palace? Brennan asked. Tomorrow, Seraphine said. But I need something from you first. I need a letter from the town council, attesting to the tribute amounts you've actually paid versus what was demanded. I need testimony from your merchants and farmers about economic conditions. I need documentation showing you've been trying to comply in good faith. Without that, this just looks like accusations from an outcast princess. With it, this becomes irrefutable evidence. You'll have it, Hrothgar said immediately. Everything we have. And Lady Seraphine, thank you. We didn't believe you when you arrived. We were wrong. Seraphine smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed her features. You were cautious. That's not wrong, that's survival. But I hope this proves that not all vampires are predators. Some of us just want to build something better. They spent the rest of the day gathering documentation, with half the town contributing statements, receipts, testimonies. By evening, they had a comprehensive case proving both Lord Draven's corruption and Greywater Falls' good faith efforts. That night, the inn threw an impromptu celebration. Someone brought out fiddles and the common room filled with music and laughter. Townspeople who'd avoided Seraphine the previous day now approached cautiously to thank her, to touch her hand, to offer small gifts, a carved wooden bird, a woven bracelet, a jar of honey. Marcus watched Seraphine accept each gift with grace, describing them through touch, and felt his heart swell with pride and something deeper. Through the bond, she felt his emotion and turned toward him. "What?" she asked softly. "Nothing. Just, you're amazing. You know that." She ducked her head, embarrassed but pleased. "I'm just doing what's right." "Exactly." The celebration went late into the night, but eventually they retired to their room. Tomorrow would bring the journey back to the Eternal Palace, the confrontation with the Emperor, the test of whether this fragile hope could survive contact with political reality. But tonight they had this proof that change was possible, that bridges could be built, that an outcast princess and a wandering human could actually make a difference. In the darkness of their room, Seraphine found Marcus's hand and held it tight. "Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for this," she whispered. "These 2 days have been worth 300 years of isolation." "This is just the beginning," Marcus promised. "We're going to change the world, Seraphine. One town at a time if we have to." And connected by touch and bond and hope, they rested, gathering strength for the battle ahead. The return to the Eternal Palace took 2 days of hard travel, carrying with them documents that could either change everything or get them both executed for treason. The closer they got to the obsidian fortress looming against the eternal night, the more Marcus felt Seraphine's anxiety building through their bond. "What if he doesn't listen?" she asked on the second evening as they made camp in a mountain pass. "My father has never listened to me before. Never even acknowledged my presence at court except when absolutely required by protocol. Why would this time be different?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, feeding their small fire. "Because this time you have something he needs, evidence of someone stealing from him. Emperors don't stay in power by ignoring threats to their treasury. And if he decides I'm the threat? That I've overstepped my position by interfering in administrative matters. Then we deal with that together," Marcus said firmly. "Seraphine, worst case he banishes us, strips you of your titles, sends us away. And you know what? We'd still have each other. We'd still have this." He gestured at the documents. "Proof that we helped an entire town. That's not nothing." Through the bond, he felt her fear ease slightly, replaced by determination. "You're right. We've come this far. Might as well see it through." They reached the Eternal Palace at midnight, when the vampire court was most active. Marcus had expected guards to stop them at the gates, but their passage was mysteriously unobstructed. Apparently, word had spread about their departure, and the court was curious to see what the outcast princess would do upon her return. They went directly to Seraphine's tower, dropping their travel packs and changing into formal attire. Seraphine wore a gown she'd clearly never worn before. Midnight blue velvet embroidered with silver thread in patterns that resembled constellations. It was beautiful and clearly expensive, probably a gift from some relative who'd sent it to satisfy protocol without ever expecting her to wear it publicly. "How do I look?" she asked, that familiar uncertainty in her voice. Marcus took her hands. "Like a princess who's about to remind an emperor why royal bloodlines matter. You look powerful, Seraphine. You look like someone who deserves to be heard." They made their way to the throne room where the emperor held nightly audiences. As they approached the massive doors, a guard finally stopped them. "Princess Seraphine is not on the audience schedule," he said uncertainly. "Princess Seraphine is invoking her right as a daughter of the blood to seek private audience with His Imperial Majesty," Seraphine replied, her voice ringing with authority Marcus had never heard before. "This concerns threats to the Imperial Treasury. You will announce me, or you will explain to the Emperor why you delayed information about ongoing theft from his coffers." The guard's eyes widened. He hesitated only a moment, then opened the doors and announced, "Princess Seraphine Valdrath and her bonded partner Marcus Thorne request urgent private audience regarding threats to the Imperial Treasury." The throne room fell silent. It was a vast chamber easily 300 feet long, with a ceiling lost in shadows far above. Columns carved to resemble twisted trees lined the space, and between them stood courtiers in their finest, the entire vampire nobility assembled for the nightly court. At the far end, elevated on a dais of black stone, sat Emperor Valdrath himself. Marcus had never seen the emperor before. The vampire was ancient beyond comprehension, Some said 5,000 years old, though no one knew for certain. He appeared as a man in his prime, tall and powerfully built, with hair like midnight and eyes that burned like molten gold. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, and his presence was so overwhelming that Marcus's instinct was to drop to his knees and beg mercy. Seraphine felt it too, but she walked forward steadily, Marcus at her side, and when they reached the appropriate distance, she knelt with grace despite her braced leg. Marcus followed her lead. "Father," Seraphine said, her voice carrying clearly in the huge space, "I apologize for the unscheduled interruption, but I bring evidence of theft from the imperial treasury that requires your immediate attention." The emperor studied his 17th daughter, perhaps the first time he truly looked at her in decades. When he spoke, his voice was deep, resonant, carrying the weight of millennia. "Seraphine, you left the palace without permission. You bonded with a human. You have been acting outside your station. And now you return making accusations of theft." He paused. "This should be interesting. Proceed." Seraphine raised her head, and though she couldn't see him, she faced her father with courage Marcus found breathtaking. "Your Majesty, I have documented evidence that Lord Draven, administrator of the Southern Territories, has been embezzling tribute payments. Over the past decade, he has stolen approximately 70,000 silver from the imperial treasury while simultaneously increasing demands on human towns to cover his theft." A murmur rippled through the court. Lord Draven, a lesser noble who'd been standing in the crowd, went very pale. "These are serious accusations," the emperor said. "What proof do you offer?" Marcus stepped forward, carrying the documents they'd compiled. He approached the throne with careful respect, knelt and held them out. A servant took them and delivered them to the emperor. The emperor read in silence. The court barely breathed. After what felt like an eternity, the emperor looked up. "These records show significant discrepancies between collected tribute and reported tribute. But how did you obtain administrative documentation, Seraphine? Those records should be secure." "I told Lord Draven's functionaries I was conducting a surprise audit on your behalf," Seraphine admitted. "A lie, but a useful one. They didn't dare refuse a princess of the blood, even one as overlooked as myself." The faintest hint of a smile touched the emperor's lips. "Clever. Continue." "I also have testimony from Greywater Falls, the human town most affected by this corruption." Marcus produced the letters and statements they gathered. "These people have been pushed to the brink of starvation by tribute demands they believed came from you. They're loyal subjects who've been exploited by a corrupt official. They don't want rebellion, Your Majesty. They want fair governance." The emperor's golden eyes fixed on Marcus with intensity that felt like standing under a physical weight. "You are the human who bonded with my daughter. Marcus Thorne, is it?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Why should I care what a human town wants?" The question hung in the air, a test, a challenge. Marcus chose his words carefully, "Because Your Majesty rules an empire, not just vampire territories. An empire requires stability. Pushing human populations to desperation creates instability, rebellions, abandoned towns, decreased productivity. It's inefficient. And from what I've learned of you, Your Majesty, you value efficiency above all else." Something shifted in the emperor's expression, not quite approval but interest. "Go on." "Lady Seraphine has drafted a proposal," Marcus continued, producing the final document. "Reduce tribute from southern territories to 30% of productivity, implement annual reviews based on harvest conditions, and establish oversight to prevent future corruption. This maintains imperial income while ensuring sustainable governance. It's more efficient than the current system, which is slowly destroying the very sources of revenue it's meant to tap." The emperor took the proposal, read it, then looked at Seraphine. "You wrote this?" "I did, Father. It's well-reasoned, comprehensive, shows understanding of both economic realities and political necessities." He paused. "When did you become competent in imperial administration?" "I was under the impression you spent your time reading." There was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity. "I've spent 3 centuries reading everything I could find about governance, economics, diplomacy, and history," Seraphine replied. I had nothing else to do. No one wanted me at court, no one wanted me in council, so I educated myself. I may not have experience, but I have knowledge. And now, thanks to Marcus, I have the opportunity to apply it. The emperor was silent for a long moment, then, Lord Draven approached the throne. The vampire administrator came forward on trembling legs, his face ashen. Your Imperial Majesty, I can explain. Silence. The single word carried such power that Draven fell to his knees. You have stolen from me. You have damaged my reputation by forcing excessive tribute in my name. You have endangered imperial stability through your greed. Under imperial law, the penalty for such crimes is death. However, he turned back to Seraphine. My daughter has shown me mercy by offering a solution rather than simply exposing the problem. I am inclined to show similar mercy. Lord Draven, you are stripped of your position and all titles. You will serve the remainder of your existence in the Southern Territories, working without pay to rebuild the communities you damaged. If you refuse, the alternative is execution. Choose. I accept your mercy, Your Majesty, Draven gasped. Then remove yourself from my sight. The Emperor gestured, and guards dragged Draven away. The Emperor looked at Seraphine and Marcus. Your proposal is accepted. I will implement it not just in the Southern Territories but empire-wide. If similar corruption exists elsewhere, and I suspect it does, this will root it out. You have done the Empire a service. He paused, then continued, Seraphine, I have neglected you. This is now apparent to me. You possess capabilities I failed to recognize, perhaps because I could not see past your limitations. This was my failure, not yours. Seraphine's hands were shaking. Through the bond, Marcus felt her overwhelming shock. Her father, the Emperor who'd barely acknowledged her existence, was apologizing. Publicly. I am creating a new position, Ambassador of Human-Vampire Relations, the Emperor announced. The role will involve traveling to both human and vampire territories, mediating disputes, ensuring fair governance, serving as a bridge between our peoples. Seraphine, I appoint you to this position with Marcus Thorne as your official partner and representative. You will have full diplomatic authority and access to imperial resources. The throne room erupted in shocked whispers. The Emperor raised a hand, and silence fell immediately. Does anyone dispute my judgment? His tone made clear that disputing would be unwise. No one spoke. Then it is settled. Seraphine, Marcus, you will depart at your convenience to begin your duties. I expect regular reports. And daughter? He looked directly at Seraphine for the first time with something approaching respect. Make me proud. Prove that House Valdrath's strength lies not just in power, but in wisdom. Seraphine stood, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I will, Father. Thank you. They were dismissed with honors, escorted from the throne room by guards who now treated them with respect rather than contempt. As soon as they were alone in the corridor, Seraphine collapsed against Marcus, trembling. Did that really just happen? She whispered. Yes, Marcus said, holding her steady. You just changed imperial policy. You saved a town. You earned your father's respect. You did that, Seraphine. She laughed, slightly hysterical, tears streaming from beneath her blindfold. I don't know how to be an ambassador. I don't know how to represent the Empire. I've never done anything but read and hide. Then we'll learn together, Marcus said. Just like everything else. They returned to Seraphine's tower, but it felt different now. No longer a prison but a place to rest between journeys. They stayed up until dawn, planning their next steps, discussing which territories to visit first, how to approach different situations. As the sun rose beyond the windows, invisible to Seraphine's eyes but visible through their bond, Marcus realized something profound. They'd actually done it. 2 outcasts, 1 blind vampire princess and 1 wandering human, had changed the world. This was just the beginning. 5 years later, Marcus stood at the edge of a human port city called Salt Haven, watching ships come and go in the harbor. The city was bustling with activity. Merchants calling out prices, dockworkers loading cargo, children playing between warehouses. It was chaotic, vibrant, alive. and it was hosting the first ever joint human-vampire trade summit. "How does it look?" Seraphine asked, coming up beside him. She no longer wore the blindfold. It had become unnecessary as their bond deepened, as she learned to see the world through his eyes so seamlessly that she sometimes forgot she was blind at all. "Incredible," Marcus said. 5 years ago humans and vampires wouldn't have been in the same room without weapons drawn. Now look, vampire merchants negotiating with human traders, joint business ventures being discussed, people actually talking instead of fighting. "We didn't do this alone," Seraphine reminded him. "It took hundreds of people willing to try, willing to risk trust. But it started with us," Marcus said. "With you refusing to accept that things had to stay broken." Their work over the past 5 years had been exhausting, dangerous, and infinitely rewarding. They'd mediated territorial disputes, negotiated trade agreements, exposed corruption in both human and vampire administrations, and slowly, painfully, built bridges between peoples who'd been enemies for millennia. It hadn't always worked. They'd failed as often as they'd succeeded. They'd been threatened, attacked, rejected by both humans who hated vampires and vampires who hated humans. They'd nearly died 3 times. But they'd also succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. The Greywater Falls model had been replicated across the empire. Dozens of towns were now thriving under fair governance. Human-vampire joint councils had been established in border regions. Trade had increased. Violence had decreased. The world was changing, slowly but undeniably. "Your father is coming to the summit," Marcus mentioned. "He sent word this morning." Seraphine's eyebrows rose. "The Emperor himself? That's unexpected." "He wants to see what his wayward daughter has built." Marcus smiled. "His words, not mine. But Seraphine, he's proud of you. His letters make that clear." Their relationship with the Emperor had evolved. He'd never become a warm, loving father. 5,000 years of existence had hardened him too thoroughly. But he'd become supportive, acknowledging Seraphine's work publicly, providing resources, even defending their initiatives when conservative vampire lords opposed them. "I never imagined this," Seraphine said softly, looking out at the harbor through Marcus's eyes. "When you knelt before me in the bonding hall 5 years ago, I thought, maybe I'd found one person who didn't see me as broken. I never imagined we'd end up here doing this." Marcus took her hand. "Do you regret it? The travel, the danger, the constant struggle?" "Not for a moment." She turned to him, those luminous white eyes that glowed with crimson light meeting his. She still couldn't see him with her own vision, but through the bond she knew his face better than her own. "Marcus, you gave me a life. A purpose. A reason to be more than a cautionary tale. How could I regret that?" He pulled her close and she leaned against him, her wings folding around them both, a gesture that had become their private sanctuary, a moment of peace in their hectic lives. "I love you," Marcus said. They'd said it before many times, but it still felt important to say again. "I love you too," Seraphine replied. "My human. My partner. My eyes when I need them, my voice when I can't speak, my courage when fear threatens. Thank you for refusing to let me hide. Thank you for being worth finding," Marcus said. They stood there for a while, wrapped in wings and sunlight, an outcast princess and a wandering human who'd found in each other what the world refused to give them: acceptance, purpose, love. Behind them, the summit building was filling with delegates from a dozen territories. There would be arguments, compromises, small victories and frustrating setbacks. The work was never done. But for this moment they had peace. And they had each other. Which, in the end, was more than enough. In the years that followed, Ambassador Seraphine Valdrath and Marcus Thorne became legendary figures. Proof that bridges could be built across any divide, that outcasts could change the world, that love and partnership could triumph over prejudice and hatred. Their story was told in both human taverns and vampire courts, inspiring others to reach across boundaries they'd thought impossible to cross. And every night, in whatever town or city their work took them to, they stood together and watched the world. He with his eyes, she through their bond, and dreamed of the future they were building, one conversation, one negotiation, one act of courage at a time. For they had learned the greatest truth: that no one is truly broken, only unseen. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to look past the blindfold, past the scars, past society's judgment, to find the extraordinary person waiting beneath. Sometimes all it takes is refusing to turn away when everyone else does. Sometimes all it takes is believing someone is worth the bond, even when the world says they're not. And from that belief, worlds can change.